This is Cajamarca, the town where the Inca Empire died. Not metaphorically, not gradually over decades of decline, but literally. Right here, in 1532, the last independent Inca emperor, Atahualpa, took his final bath before meeting Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro in what would become history's most consequential betrayal. The infamous ransom room still stands, a stark reminder that some promises are worth less than the gold they're traded for. High in the northern Andes of Peru, where the air is thin and history hangs heavy, Cajamarca doesn't look like the kind of place that would change the course of a continent. The Spanish left their mark in elaborate Baroque churches and colonial plazas. But make no mistake, this is indigenous country. Good morning. If you remember my last video, I wasn't sure if we were going to the north of Peru or we were changing our plans and going to the highlands, to the glaciers, or going to the jungle. I was completely lost. In the end, we decided to follow our original plan and come up to the north, and we arrived this morning very early at 5 a.m. to Cajamarca, which is a lovely city. I'll show you in this video. It's beautiful. And one thing, if you see me a bit tired, it is because of that. We took a bus at midnight and left us here at 5 a.m. So we didn't get much sleep. We had to get an early booking and pay extra for it and get a few hours of sleep because we are absolutely tired. So now we're feeling a bit better and we are ready to explore this town. The main point, as any colonial city, is the main plaza, the main square. And what can you find here? Of course, you can find a chicken. Well, it's the first time in Latin America, in both Central and South America, where there are actually some pedestrian streets and no cars. That's surprising and beautiful. Little dog. Cajamarca has a very interesting story related to the Incas' defeat by the Spanish conquistadors. However, I will tell you more about it later. But what is important to know is that there is not a lot of Inca heritage in here in terms of buildings and monuments. It's mostly rebuilt in the colonial style, but those colonial houses are fantastic. The architecture is very well preserved and the churches and houses are beautiful. However, even if the architecture is not really preserved and is all colonial, the traditions do remain today. And here in Cajamarca, you can still find a lot of people, especially women, wearing the traditional dresses and the traditional costumes. And a lot of the Quechua culture still remains, from both handicrafts and traditions. We walked a bit more around the old part of the town before heading to the central market to see if we could eat something. A town wouldn't be a town without its central market. And here, one of the traditional foods that you can see here in the market being sold is cuy frito, fried cuy, which is actually a guinea pig. I haven't tasted it yet, and I'm not sure I will. After deciding not to eat the cuy this time, we headed to the bus station and took a chicken bus to a very interesting place. Not enjoying this. Look at that. A seat, and we're improving this. You can feel we're high up because just a small walk from the bus, where the bus left us, and I'm already short of breath. You can feel the lack of oxygen for sure. So the reason we came here and this small walk is to see this site. It's called Ventanillas de Ocuzco, and that translates to like little windows of Ocuzco. And basically what it is, what there is here behind me, it's a cemetery. They found over 300 cavities here in the rock, and they assumed that there were corpses in there. They could find a few ones, I think only one full body, obviously the skeleton. But now you can see all these small windows that are here in the rock. So the site here is pretty small. You see it in a quarter of an hour or so, but it's still pretty cool to see this. What my question is, how the hell did they put the bodies in there? Because the holes are pretty shallow. They're not very deep. So I'm not sure how they would put a whole body in there. Oh well, that's for archaeologists to decide. Still pretty cool sight to see. There's this beautiful stairwell here in the city, and what you get is a beautiful sight of the whole town from here. But as soon as you do any physical activity, you feel exhausted. You can actually feel it. Oh well, hope there's a church. I hope there's beer up there. I don't know. Fingers crossed. So the church is there, very nice. And on the other side, you get a 3s. You get a 180 view of the town. Hello, altitude cat. This is going to be quite an interesting day trip, I think. Of course, we had to come with a group because this is one of these places where you are way too far from civilization to come on your own. It's going to cost you a fortune if you can find a taxi, and then you won't understand the explanations or you won't hear anything. But anyway, that aside, this place is also quite high up. Cajamarca, where we are staying, that's at 2,700 meters, and now we're at almost 36, so quite a lot higher up, and not the highest I've been, but enough to feel it in your head and enough to feel the altitude. So let's see how it goes. This small walk here is an archaeological site. I've heard it's pretty interesting, pretty old, and let's see how it is. Unfortunately, the guide we had was not to my tasting, to say the least. He was treating us a bit like a child or a school trip, rather than treating us like a functioning adults and explaining things in a meaningful way. I know this is sometimes a deal when you get a group tour and whatnot, but I have a bit the impression of being treated like a child. Like, I don't know, like being on a school trip. That I thought that was something I left behind. And that's why I usually prefer to do things on my own and do my own research. But sometimes this is what it is when you're in the corner of the world, I guess. After looking at some carvings on the rocks and some pretty uninteresting remains, then we walked through this rock forest. Now that was actually pretty cool. These huge volcanic rocks were shaped by the wind and the weather, and they were creating these weird, almost alien formations. So what is important about this site is not the rock forest or even the archaeological findings. It's actually this canal. Because this canal, it brings water from here. It used to bring water from here up in the mountains to the valley of Cajamarca, where we are staying the night. They say this canal is about 9 kilometers long, and it was built by the primitive inhabitants here before any tools, before any metals tools, better said. So they don't know exactly how they built this, and they don't know exactly how they had the technology to build this so exactly and so with such precision that brings water all the way down to Cajamarca. a pretty cool morning trip from Cajamarca. However, what I don't like very much is treated like a child, being treated like a child. I know it depends on the guide, because you can get fantastic ones and you can get others that, well, are not so great. But oh well, still pretty interesting. You probably can do that on your own, but it's going to be an overkill, and you're not going to learn or understand what's going on in here. The last place we are visiting here in Cajamarca, before we continue up north, is the ransom room. It's the only remain of the Inca Empire here in Cajamarca, as the rest of the city was totally refurbished and reformed to become a typical colonial city. Legend says that Inca Emperor Atahualpa, when they encountered the Spanish and Francisco de Pizarro, he fell in the hands of the Spanish conquistadors, and at that point he offered to fill the room that he was incarcerated in, fill it with gold and silver in order to secure his rescue. The Spanish accepted. He filled his part of the threat. He filled the room with gold and jewelry and silver. The Spanish took it, and then they executed him anyway. That marked sort of like the end of the Inca Empire here in Peru. And what we are visiting today is precisely what legend says is that room where Atahualpa was incarcerated. So the room here behind me marks the end of the Inca Empire, and this is supposedly where Atahualpa was imprisoned and people had to bring the gold to fulfill his promise to be released. So there is no actual evidence that the gold was here. There's evidence that the Inca was imprisoned and he paid one of the highest ransom ever. I think it amounted for about 6,000 kilograms of gold and 12,000 kilograms of silver, which would be worth hundreds of millions today. And the Spanish just melted everything and sent all the money back to Spain. But yeah, there's no actual evidence that he was imprisoned here or that the gold was stored here. However, this is important more for that tradition and that end of the Inca Empire and the start of the Spanish conquista here in Peru. So it's not that much of the actual evidence, it's more about the symbolic and historical moment. So that has been the video about Cajamarca. I hope you enjoyed it. Another off the beaten path town here in Peru. Next, we're going up north into the capital of the Amazonia, Chachapoyas. See you soon, and thanks for watching.